The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of courtroom 304, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Judge William Harrison sat behind his elevated bench, his silver-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed the day's cases. At 62 years old, with salt and pepper hair and deep-set eyes, he had presided over this courtroom in Millbrook County for 2 decades. The clock struck 9:30 a.m. when Maya Thompson walked into the courtroom. She was a 35-year-old black woman dressed in a professional navy blue blazer and matching slacks. Her natural hair was styled in neat, shoulder-length twists, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Maya had rushed from across town, where she had been filming interviews for her latest documentary project. Case number 247, Maya Thompson, traffic violation, the court clerk announced, her voice echoing through the half-empty courtroom. Maya approached the defendant's podium, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Judge Harrison looked down at her from his bench, his expression stern and unyielding. The morning light caught his wedding ring as he shuffled through the papers before him. "Miss Thompson," Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "you are here for running a red light at the intersection of Main and Oak Street on April 15th at 8:45 p.m. How do you play it?" "Your Honor," Maya responded calmly, "while I acknowledge being at that intersection, I'd like to explain the circumstances." Judge Harrison cut her off with a wave of his hand. "The question is simple, Ms. Thompson. How do you play it?" Maya took a deep breath, her hands resting steady on the podium. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I was making a legal right turn on red after coming to a complete stop. I have dashcam footage that shows." "Officer Parker's report clearly states that you proceeded through the intersection while the light was red." Judge Harrison interrupted again, his tone growing more irritated. "Are you suggesting the officer's report is incorrect?" The young police officer standing to the side shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with both Maya and the judge. Maya noticed his unease but maintained her composure. "Your Honor, I respect Officer Parker's service, but I believe there may have been a misunderstanding of the situation. If you'll allow me to present my evidence." Judge Harrison's frown deepened. "Miss Thompson, I've been serving on this bench longer than you've probably been driving. Officer Parker is one of our most reliable officers. His record speaks for itself." The air in the courtroom grew thick with tension. A few spectators in the gallery leaned forward, watching the exchange with growing interest. The court clerk had stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Maya tried one more time, her voice remaining steady despite her mounting frustration. "Your Honor, I understand and respect your experience. However, as a citizen, I have the right to present evidence in my defense. I was returning from filming a community event that evening, and my dashcam was—" "That's enough," Judge Harrison declared, his gavel striking the sound block with a sharp crack. "Your continued attempts to undermine the officer's testimony only make this situation worse. I find you guilty of the traffic violation. The fine will be $300, the maximum penalty for this offense." Maya's shoulders tensed, but she didn't slump. Years of documenting injustice had taught her to maintain her dignity in the face of unfair treatment. She noticed the court reporter's subtle head shake and the public defender in the back of the room scribbling furiously in his notepad. Additionally, Judge Harrison continued, "I'm adding a $50 court fee for wasting the court's time with these attempts to avoid responsibility. You'll have 30 days to pay the total amount of $350. Next case." As Maya turned to leave the courtroom, she caught sight of her production assistant, James, sitting quietly in the back row. He had been filming the entire proceeding with a hidden camera for their upcoming documentary on bias in the justice system. Maya's expression remained neutral, but a small glimmer appeared in her eyes. This interaction would serve a greater purpose than Judge Harrison could imagine. Walking out into the bright morning sun, Maya pulled out her phone and dialed her producer's number. "Sarah? Yes, the hearing just finished. Trust me, what just happened in there? It's exactly what we needed for the opening sequence of Blind Justice. Meet me at the studio in an hour. This changes everything." Later that evening, Judge William Harrison adjusted his bow tie in front of the mirror at the Millbrook Arts Center. The annual Film and Culture Festival was one of the few events where the town's elite gathered to show their support for the arts. His wife, Margaret, a board member of the Arts Council, had insisted he attend. William, dear, we need to hurry, Margaret called, checking her pearl necklace one last time. The documentary screening starts in 15 minutes, and you know how important this is for the community. The judge sighed, following his wife into the renovated theater. The festival program in his hand read Blind Justice, a look at America's legal system by award-winning filmmaker Maya Thompson. The name didn't register with him. He'd seen hundreds of people in his courtroom that day alone. The elegant theater was packed with local politicians, business leaders, and social activists. Judge Harrison took his reserved seat in the front row, next to the mayor and other distinguished guests. The lights dimmed, and the screen came to life. A familiar courtroom appeared on screen. His courtroom. Judge Harrison's breath caught in his throat as he watched himself from just that morning, looking down at Maya Thompson. The footage was crystal clear, captured from an angle that showed both his stern expression and Maya's composed demeanor. "Oh my," Margaret whispered, gripping his arm. The audience murmured as they recognized their town's respected judge displaying clear bias in real time. The scene transitioned smoothly to Maya speaking directly to the camera, her presence commanding and professional. "What you just witnessed was not staged," she explained. "As a 3-time Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker, I've spent the last decade examining how implicit bias affects our justice system. Today, I became part of my own story." Judge Harrison's collar felt tight as he watched Maya's credentials flash across the screen. Harvard graduate, Peabody Award winner, director of acclaimed documentaries on social justice. Images of her previous work showed her interviewing Supreme Court justices, civil rights leaders, and legal scholars. The documentary skillfully wove together his courtroom footage with statistics about racial disparities in traffic stops and sentencing. Maya's voiceover was not angry or accusatory. Instead, it was thoughtful and analytical, making the impact even more powerful. In the darkness of the theater, Judge Harrison felt every pair of eyes occasionally glancing his way. The mayor shifted uncomfortably beside him. Margaret's hand had gone limp on his arm. Halfway through the film, Maya appeared at a TED talk, addressing a packed auditorium. "Our justice system," she said, "is only as fair as the people who run it are willing to examine their own biases. Every day, small decisions in courtrooms across America shape lives, families, and entire communities." The judge watched, transfixed, as Maya shared stories of her journey from a small-town girl to a celebrated filmmaker. Her production company had won numerous awards for exposing systemic inequalities. The traffic court incident was now becoming part of a larger narrative about power, privilege, and the possibility of change. When the lights came up for intermission, Judge Harrison remained seated while others filed out. His mind raced back to that morning, how quickly he had dismissed her, how easily he had maximized her fine, how confidently he had sided with Officer Parker without even viewing her evidence. "Judge Harrison," a gentle voice spoke from behind him. He turned to find Maya Thompson standing there, camera crew at a respectful distance. "I believe we have more to discuss about this morning's proceedings." The judge stood slowly, his legal training warring with his human instincts. Finally, he nodded. "Yes, Miss Thompson, I believe we do." Maya gestured to a private room off the main hall. "Would you be willing to share your thoughts on camera? Your perspective as a judge confronting these issues could be invaluable to our audience." As they walked together, followed by curious glances from festival attendees, Judge Harrison realized this was more than just an embarrassing moment caught on film. It was an opportunity, painful but necessary, to examine 2 decades of decisions from a new perspective. The documentary wasn't just exposing bias, it was offering a chance for redemption. As Maya's crew set up their equipment in the quiet room, Judge Harrison took a deep breath. Sometimes, he thought, the most important judgments are the ones we make about ourselves. The morning after the film festival, Millbrook woke up to a town buzzing with conversation. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Daily, ran a front-page headline. "Local Judge Confronts Bias in Award-Winning Filmmaker's Documentary." Below the headline was a split image. Judge Harrison on the bench and Maya Thompson accepting her previous Emmy nomination. Sarah Chen, Maya's producer, sat in their production office scrolling through her phone. "Maya, this is going viral," she said, showing Maya the trending statistics. "The clip from your courtroom has over 2 million views already. National news networks are calling for interviews." Maya sipped her morning coffee, watching their small team of editors working on the documentary's final cut. This isn't about going viral, Sarah. It's about creating real change. The office phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Other people who had faced similar experiences in Judge Harrison's courtroom were coming forward, sharing their stories through social media and local news channels. Some defended the judge, citing his years of service and community involvement. Others called for his immediate resignation. At the courthouse, Judge Harrison sat in his chambers, reading through emails that had flooded his inbox. His clerk, Jessica, knocked on the door with a stack of messages from other judges across the country. "Sir," Jessica said carefully, "Channel 5 News is outside again, and the Chief Justice called. He wants to meet with you this afternoon." The judge nodded, noticing how Jessica's usual informal Judge Bill had become a more distant "sir." Actions had consequences, and he was feeling them all. His computer screen showed a social media thread where lawyers were sharing their experiences in his courtroom. One post caught his eye. A young public defender had written about how he had noticed the pattern years ago but felt powerless to challenge it. Meanwhile, at the local coffee shop, Maya was meeting with James, her cinematographer, when an elderly white woman approached their table. "Are you the filmmaker?" the woman asked, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "The one from the traffic court." Maya nodded, gesturing to an empty chair. The woman sat down, her eyes filling with tears. "My grandson," she began, her voice shaking. "He's been in prison for 3 years because of a similar situation. Different judge, same story. No one would listen when we tried to show evidence of his innocence." James quietly turned on his camera as the woman shared her story. This was what Maya had hoped for, not just exposure of one incident, but a broader conversation about justice in their community. Across town, at the Millbrook Police Department, Officer Parker, who had written Maya's ticket, requested a meeting with his supervisor. The young officer had watched the documentary footage and recognized his own role in perpetuating biases. He wanted to discuss implementing body camera review protocols for traffic stops. The local bar association called an emergency meeting. Legal professionals from around the county gathered to discuss implicit bias training and new guidelines for court procedures. Judge Harrison's situation had become a catalyst for examining the entire system. On social media, the hashtag #BlindJusticeDoc was trending. People shared their own courthouse experiences, both positive and negative. Civil rights organizations offered to partner with Maya's production company for wider distribution of the documentary. By evening, Maya received an unexpected email from the dean of the local law school. They wanted to use excerpts from her documentary in their ethics curriculum. "Your film," the dean wrote, "shows how seemingly small decisions can reveal larger systemic issues." In his home, Judge Harrison watched the coverage with his wife Margaret. The news showed clips of protesters outside the courthouse, but also of community leaders calling for constructive dialogue rather than punishment. "Bill," Margaret said softly, "maybe this is an opportunity. Remember why you became a judge in the first place?" He did remember. 30 years ago, as a young lawyer, he had dreamed of making the justice system fairer. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that dream. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Would you be willing to participate in a town hall discussion next week? People need to hear your perspective on this journey." The judge looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. He typed back a simple yes. This was no longer just about one traffic stop, one judge, or one filmmaker. It had become a mirror for their entire community to examine itself, its assumptions, and its path forward. Judge William Harrison sat alone in his home office at 3 a.m., surrounded by 20 years of case files. He had taken a 2-week leave of absence from the bench, using this time to review his past decisions. His desktop computer displayed a spreadsheet where he had been tracking patterns in his rulings, and the results troubled him deeply. "Bill, are you still up?" Margaret called softly from the doorway, wearing her blue robe and carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea. She placed one beside him and noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "You've been at this for days." "I have to understand, Margaret," he replied, rubbing his tired eyes. "Look at these numbers. In drug possession cases, I gave white defendants probation 80% of the time. For black defendants with similar records, only 25%. How did I not see this before?" Across town, in her production studio, Maya Thompson was also working late. Her team had been documenting Judge Harrison's journey of self-discovery, turning it into a powerful addition to their documentary series. The working title on her editing screen read, Beyond Blind Justice, A Judge's Journey. Maya, James called from his editing station, you need to see this footage from the courthouse archives. On his screen, a younger Judge Harrison was giving his first speech after being appointed to the bench. His words from 15 years ago echoed through the studio. Justice must be blind to everything except the truth. That's the promise I make to this community. The next morning, Judge Harrison visited the public defender's office, something he had never done in his 2 decades on the bench. The waiting room fell silent as he walked in, carrying a thick folder under his arm. Your Honor, Linda Martinez, the chief public defender, stepped out of her office. Is everything all right? Ms. Martinez, he said, his voice heavy with purpose, I need your help reviewing these cases. There might be people who deserve appeals, who deserve a second look with clearer eyes. In the conference room, they spread out dozens of cases. Linda called in her team, and together they began identifying patterns. Young public defenders who had been afraid to challenge his decisions now spoke freely, sharing their observations and concerns. Meanwhile, Maya was interviewing Officer Parker for her documentary. The young police officer had become an unexpected ally in pushing for reform. After watching the documentary, Officer Parker explained to the camera, I started reviewing my own traffic stop data. The numbers don't lie. I was stopping minority drivers 3 times more often than white drivers. We need better training, better oversight. Back at his home office, Judge Harrison opened an email from the State Judicial Review Board. They were interested in using his experience as a case study for judicial training programs. His first instinct was to decline, to hide from the shame. But then he remembered Maya's words about how change happens through uncomfortable conversations. That afternoon, Maya's film crew captured a powerful moment. Judge Harrison returned to his courtroom, not to sit on the bench, but to sit in the defendant's chair. He wanted to see the room from this perspective, to understand how it felt to look up at that imposing bench. What do you feel, Your Honor? Maya asked from behind the camera. Small, he answered honestly. I feel small, and I finally understand why so many voices in here trembled. Why so many eyes looked down instead of meeting mine. I mistook fear for guilt, respect for submission. Later that evening, Judge Harrison sat with his grandson Tommy, helping with homework. The boy looked up from his textbook with curious eyes. Grandpa, kids at school are talking about your movie. They say you're learning to be a better judge. How do you learn something new when you're already supposed to be an expert? The judge smiled, touched by the innocent wisdom of the question. Tommy, being an expert doesn't mean you know everything. It means you never stop learning, never stop trying to be better. At midnight, Judge Harrison finished drafting a proposal for his return to the bench. It included mandatory bias training for all court staff, regular review of sentencing patterns, and a new program allowing defendants to submit written statements about their courtroom experiences. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya, ready to film your return to court next week. He typed back, ready, not as the same judge who left, but as someone who finally understands that true justice requires constant self-examination. The next morning's sunrise found both Maya and Judge Harrison preparing for another day of transformation. She with her camera, he with his conscience, both committed to making their community's justice system live up to its highest ideals. The morning after the film festival, Millbrook woke up to a town buzzing with conversation. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Daily, ran a front-page headline. Local judge confronts bias in award-winning filmmaker's documentary. Below the headline was a split image. Judge Harrison on the bench and Maya Thompson accepting her previous Emmy nomination. Sarah Chen, Maya's producer, sat in their production office scrolling through her phone. Maya, this is going viral, she said, showing Maya the trending statistics. The clip from your courtroom has over 2 million views already. National news networks are calling for interviews. Maya sipped her morning coffee, watching their small team of editors working on the documentary's final cut. This isn't about going viral, Sarah. It's about creating real change. The office phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Other people who had faced similar experiences in Judge Harrison's courtroom were coming forward, sharing their stories through social media and local news channels. Some defended the judge, citing his years of service and community involvement. Others called for his immediate resignation. At the courthouse, Judge Harrison sat in his chambers, reading through emails that had flooded his inbox. His clerk, Jessica, knocked on the door with a stack of messages from other judges across the country. "Sir," Jessica said carefully, "Channel 5 News is outside again, and the Chief Justice called. He wants to meet with you this afternoon." The judge nodded, noticing how Jessica's usual informal judge bill had become a more distant "sir." Actions had consequences, and he was feeling them all. His computer screen showed a social media thread where lawyers were sharing their experiences in his courtroom. One post caught his eye. A young public defender had written about how he had noticed the pattern years ago but felt powerless to challenge it. Meanwhile, at the local coffee shop, Maya was meeting with James, her cinematographer, when an elderly white woman approached their table. "Are you the filmmaker?" the woman asked, her hands clutching her purse tightly. "The one from the traffic court?" Maya nodded, gesturing to an empty chair. The woman sat down, her eyes filling with tears. "My grandson," she began, her voice shaking. "He's been in prison for 3 years because of a similar situation. Different judge, same story. No one would listen when we tried to show evidence of his innocence." James quietly turned on his camera as the woman shared her story. This was what Maya had hoped for, not just exposure of one incident, but a broader conversation about justice in their community. Across town, at the Millbrook Police Department, Officer Parker, who had written Maya's ticket, requested a meeting with his supervisor. The young officer had watched the documentary footage and recognized his own role in perpetuating biases. He wanted to discuss implementing body camera review protocols for traffic stops. The local bar association called an emergency meeting. Legal professionals from around the county gathered to discuss implicit bias training and new guidelines for court procedures. Judge Harrison's situation had become a catalyst for examining the entire system. On social media, the hashtag #BlindJusticeDioc was trending. People shared their own courthouse experiences, both positive and negative. Civil rights organizations offered to partner with Maya's production company for wider distribution of the documentary. By evening, Maya received an unexpected email from the dean of the local law school. They wanted to use excerpts from her documentary in their ethics curriculum. "Your film," the dean wrote, "shows how seemingly small decisions can reveal larger systemic issues." In his home, Judge Harrison watched the coverage with his wife Margaret. The news showed clips of protesters outside the courthouse, but also of community leaders calling for constructive dialogue rather than punishment. "Bill," Margaret said softly, "maybe this is an opportunity. Remember why you became a judge in the first place?" He did remember. 30 years ago, as a young lawyer, he had dreamed of making the justice system fairer. Somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of that dream. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Would you be willing to participate in a town hall discussion next week? People need to hear your perspective on this journey." The judge looked at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. He typed back a simple yes. This was no longer just about one traffic stop, one judge, or one filmmaker. It had become a mirror for their entire community to examine itself, its assumptions, and its path forward. The conference room at the Millbrook Justice Center buzzed with anticipation. Judge Harrison and Maya Thompson sat at opposite ends of a long table, surrounded by community leaders, legal experts, and civil rights activists. The morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating the determined faces around the table. "We're calling it the Fair Justice Initiative," Maya explained, standing to present their joint proposal. Her laptop displayed a detailed PowerPoint presentation while James filmed the historic meeting. "It's not just about changing one courtroom or one judge's perspective. It's about transforming the entire system." Judge Harrison nodded, then stood to join her. "Ms. Thompson and I have spent the past 3 weeks developing this program. It combines her expertise in documenting systemic issues with my inside knowledge of where our legal system needs the most work." Linda Martinez, the chief public defender, raised her hand. "This is impressive, but how will you fund it?" Maya clicked to the next slide, showing a list of organizations and foundations. The documentary has caught the attention of several civil rights organizations. They pledged initial funding of $500,000 to implement these changes in Millbrook. If successful, the program could become a model for other communities. The proposal included several key elements: mandatory monthly bias training for all court personnel, a community oversight board with real power to review decisions, and a revolutionary new system for collecting and analyzing court data. The most important part, Judge Harrison explained, pointing to the screen, is transparency. Every decision, every sentence, every fine will be recorded and analyzed for patterns. The public will have access to this information through a user-friendly dashboard. Dr. Robert Chen, a data scientist from the local university, spoke up. I've reviewed the technical aspects of this proposal. It's ambitious but achievable. My graduate students are ready to help build the analytics platform. Maya's producer, Sarah, had been quietly filming reactions around the table. She captured the moment when Officer Parker, now appointed as police liaison to the initiative, raised an important question. What about resistance? He asked. Not everyone in law enforcement or the court system will welcome this level of scrutiny. Judge Harrison smiled grimly. I know. I would have resisted it myself a month ago. That's why we're starting with voluntary participation. Those who join the initiative will receive additional training, resources, and support. Maya added, We're not here to shame anyone. We're here to help everyone do their jobs better, more fairly, and with greater awareness. The meeting continued for hours, with different stakeholders offering suggestions and raising concerns. Judge Harrison watched Maya masterfully address each issue, her filmmaker's eye for detail now focused on building something even more important than a documentary. During a break, Maya found Judge Harrison standing by the window, looking out at the courthouse where their story had begun. Having second thoughts, she asked, joining him. No, he replied, turning to face her. I'm thinking about all the lives we might change. Not just the people who come through that courthouse, but their families, their children, their communities. Maya nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. Change ripples outward. That's why documentation is so important. People need to see it happening. Back at the table, they presented the timeline for implementation. Phase 1 would begin next month, starting with the bias training programs. Phase 2 would introduce the data collection system. Phase 3 would establish the Community Oversight Board. We need volunteers for the pilot program, Judge Harrison announced. To everyone's surprise, 5 other judges immediately raised their hands. They had seen the impact of his journey and wanted to be part of the change. As the meeting wound down, the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. What you're proposing here in Millbrook could transform our entire state's judicial system. Count on my full support. Maya's camera crew captured the spontaneous applause that followed. Later, editing the footage, she would note how Judge Harrison's eyes glistened with tears of hope and determination. Outside the Justice Center, reporters waited for statements. Judge Harrison and Maya emerged together, a powerful symbol of how adversaries could become allies in the pursuit of justice. This initiative, Maya told the cameras, proves that when we're willing to look honestly at ourselves and our systems, real change is possible. Judge Harrison added, sometimes it takes a mirror held up by someone else to help us see ourselves clearly. This initiative is about making sure that mirror stays in place, helping us all serve justice better. That evening, as Maya reviewed the day's footage, she received a text from Judge Harrison. Thank you for not just exposing the problem, but helping create the solution. She replied with a simple truth. Change happens when those with power choose to use it differently. 3 months into the Fair Justice Initiative, Maya sat in her production office reviewing footage of the latest town hall meeting. On her screen, angry faces filled the frame as Judge Michael Reynolds, one of Judge Harrison's longtime colleagues, voiced his opposition. This whole program is an insult to our justice system, Reynolds had declared, his face red with anger. We've served this community for decades without need for all this oversight. Harrison's gone soft, letting some filmmaker tell us how to do our jobs. Sarah, Maya's producer, paused the playback. He's not the only one pushing back. 3 judges have filed formal complaints about the new reporting requirements. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Judge Harrison faced his own battles. His morning calendar included a meeting with a group of senior court clerks who were resisting the new documentation procedures. They sat stiffly in his chambers, their disapproval evident in their crossed arms and tight expressions. "Your Honor," Barbara Wells, the head clerk, began, "these new forms add hours to our workload. We have to note the race, gender, and economic status of every defendant, plus write detailed summaries of each interaction. It's excessive." Judge Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Barbara, remember Mrs. Johnson from last week? The elderly black woman who almost lost her house over a minor code violation?" Barbara nodded reluctantly. "Under our old system, I might have missed the pattern, how code violations were being reported and enforced differently in different neighborhoods. These new forms helped us catch that bias. Yes, it's more work, but isn't justice worth the extra effort?" Across town, Officer Parker faced his own challenges at the police department. His fellow officers had started calling him Camera Parker because of his insistence on reviewing body cam footage for potential bias in traffic stops. "You're making us look bad," one senior officer confronted him in the break room. "All these statistics about who we stop and why, it's going to destroy morale." Parker stood his ground. "What destroys morale is knowing we're not serving everyone equally. The data doesn't lie." At the university, Dr. Chen's team was processing the first month's worth of court data when they discovered something significant. Maya and Judge Harrison rushed to his lab to see the findings. "Look at these patterns," Dr. Chen pointed to his screen. "When judges know their decisions are being monitored for bias, the racial disparities in sentencing drop by 47%. Simply being aware of the oversight is changing behavior." Maya's documentary crew captured the moment, adding it to their growing footage of the initiative's impact. But not everyone appreciated being on camera. "Turn that thing off," shouted a defense attorney in the courthouse hallway. "This isn't some reality show. This is a serious legal institution." James, the cinematographer, lowered his camera but didn't turn it off. Maya had taught him that resistance to being seen was often where the most important stories lived. During lunch, Judge Harrison met with the 5 judges who had initially volunteered for the pilot program. Their small conference room felt like a shelter from the storm of controversy outside. "I lost 3 golf buddies over this," Judge Thompson, the eldest of the group, admitted. "But yesterday, I caught myself making assumptions about a young Hispanic defendant. The new procedures made me stop, review the evidence more carefully. He was actually innocent, under our old way of doing things. He left the sentence unfinished." Maya received an unexpected ally when a National Judges Association requested permission to use clips from her documentary in their training programs. The same day, 3 more jurisdictions in neighboring counties reached out about implementing similar initiatives. "They can resist all they want," she told Judge Harrison during their weekly progress meeting. "But the data speaks for itself." By evening, as the courthouse quieted, Judge Harrison found a note slipped under his office door. It was from a young law clerk. "My grandmother came before your court 10 years ago. She always said she wasn't treated fairly. Thank you for helping make sure that doesn't happen to someone else's grandmother." He carefully folded the note and placed it in a growing file labeled "Reasons to Continue." That night, Maya added a powerful new segment to her documentary. Interviews with court employees who initially resisted the changes but were now seeing their own biases more clearly. "Change isn't just about new rules and procedures," her voiceover explained. "It's about creating space for people to grow, even when growth is uncomfortable." As the sun set over Millbrook, both Maya and Judge Harrison knew that resistance wasn't a roadblock. It was a sign they were finally addressing issues that had gone unchallenged for too long. 1 year after Maya Thompson's traffic court appearance, the Millbrook Justice Center looked very different. The lobby now featured a large digital dashboard showing real-time statistics about court decisions, traffic stops, and case outcomes broken down by demographics. But the real changes went much deeper than just numbers on a screen. Today marks 1 year since the launch of the Fair Justice Initiative. Maya announced to a packed auditorium the premiere of her follow-up documentary, Justice Renewed. The Millbrook story had drawn attendees from across the country. Judge Harrison sat in the front row, his wife Margaret holding his hand tightly. On screen, the story unfolded through a series of powerful before and after moments. The harsh judge who had fined Maya was contrasted with the changed man who now mentored other judges about confronting their biases. The resistant police officers who had initially fought against the initiative were shown leading training sessions on fair policing. The numbers tell an impressive story, Dr. Chen presented during the panel discussion after the screening. Racial disparities in sentencing have dropped by 78%. Traffic stop bias has been reduced by 65%. But the most significant change is in the culture of our justice system. Officer Parker, now promoted to training supervisor, shared his perspective. A year ago, talking about bias was seen as an attack. Now, it's part of our daily conversation. We compete to see who can catch and correct their own biases first. In the courthouse, the changes were visible everywhere. The clerk's office, once resistant to extra paperwork, had developed a streamlined digital system for tracking case data. Barbara Wells, the head clerk who had initially opposed the changes, now gave tours to visitors from other jurisdictions. "See these tablets?" she demonstrated proudly. They help defendants record their courtroom experiences. This feedback has been invaluable for improving our procedures. Judge Harrison's chambers had also transformed. The walls, once covered in legal certificates, now displayed charts tracking his decision-making patterns. A small sign on his desk read, "Question your assumptions." During lunch break, Maya found him reviewing case files with a group of law students. The judge had started a mentorship program, sharing his journey from bias to awareness with the next generation of legal professionals. "The most dangerous bias," he told the students, "is thinking you don't have any. Every morning, I read this data before taking the bench. It keeps me honest." The initiative's success had ripple effects beyond Millbrook. 20 other jurisdictions had adopted similar programs. Maya's documentary was being used in law schools nationwide. Even Judge Reynolds, once the strongest opponent, had recently requested to join the oversight committee. "I was wrong," Reynolds admitted in Maya's follow-up film. "I thought this was about shame and punishment. It's actually about growth and improvement." At the evening celebration marking the initiative's first anniversary, the community gathered in the courthouse square. Food trucks lined the streets, and families shared stories of how the changes had affected their lives. An elderly woman approached Maya with tears in her eyes. "My grandson was in Judge Harrison's court last month. He said he felt heard, respected. That's all we ever wanted. To be seen as people, not statistics." Judge Harrison took the podium as the sun began to set. "A year ago, I thought I knew what justice looked like. Miss Thompson's camera showed me I was viewing justice through a distorted lens. Today, we're all learning to see more clearly." Maya joined him at the podium, carrying a special award from the National Center for Court Innovation. "This story proves that change is possible when we're brave enough to look at ourselves honestly," she said. "But our work isn't finished." She unveiled plans for Phase 2 of the initiative, a statewide expansion program, a scholarship fund for minority law students, and a new documentary series following other communities implementing similar reforms. As the celebration continued into the evening, Judge Harrison's grandson Tommy tugged at his robe. "Grandpa, are you famous now?"